When the mountain man walked into that failing trading post, everyone knew who he'd choose. The beautiful daughter, Clara, with her porcelain skin and practiced smiles. But Cole Maddox didn't even look at her twice. His eyes found Nora instead, the heavy-set older sister everyone pretended not to see, the one who kept the place running while others took credit. In one brutal moment of honesty, he asked to court her, and the room went silent. The woman they'd written off had just been chosen, and it shattered everything they thought they knew about worth. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Wyoming Territory, 1857, was a place that didn't forgive weakness. It chewed up the soft and spit out the broken, and the Black Ridge Trading Post sat right in the middle of that unforgiving landscape like a rotting tooth in an old wolf's mouth. Nora Blackridge stood at the wooden counter, her thick fingers working through the ledger with practiced efficiency. The numbers didn't lie, even when she wished they would. 3 months behind on supply orders. The winter stock depleted faster than anticipated, debts piling up like snow in a blizzard. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of ink across her temple. Her dress, brown, practical, patched at the elbows, stretched tight across her heavy frame. 22 years old and built like her father had been, broad-shouldered and solid, the kind of body made for work rather than admiration. "Nora," her mother's voice cut through the afternoon quiet like a knife. "Where did you put the good tablecloth?" Eleanor Blackridge appeared in the doorway, her thin frame wrapped in a dress that had seen better days but still carried the ghost of elegance. She'd been beautiful once, before frontier life had carved lines into her face and turned her hands rough. "In the chest," Nora said without looking up. "Same place it always is." "Don't use that tone with me." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "We have travelers coming through, important ones by the look of their horses. Your sister needs to look presentable." Of course. Clara needed to look presentable. Clara always needed something. Nora closed the ledger and stood, her chair scraping against the worn floorboards. Through the window, she could see the horses her mother mentioned, 3 of them, sturdy mountain breeds with thick coats and intelligent eyes, the kind of horses that belonged to men who knew how to survive. "I'll get the tablecloth," she said, "and fix your hair while you're at it. You look like you've been dragged through a briar patch." Nora's hand went automatically to her dark hair, which had indeed escaped its pins and hung in messy strands around her face. She'd been up since before dawn, hauling water, stoking fires, preparing food, managing inventory. The state of her hair hadn't exactly been a priority. She moved toward the back rooms, her footsteps heavy on the old floors. The trading post had been her father's dream, built with his own hands 20 years ago when he'd still believed the frontier would make him rich. Instead, it had killed him. A bad fall from a roof he was repairing, 3 winters back. Left them with debts and a business that barely limped along. In the small room she shared with Clara, her younger sister sat at the mirror, already dressed in their mother's second-best gown, cinched tight to show off her narrow waist. Clara was everything Nora wasn't, delicate, fair-skinned, with blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold, 19 years old and aware of every ounce of power her appearance gave her. "Mother's in a state," Clara said, not turning from her reflection. "She thinks these travelers might have money." "Everyone who comes through here has more money than us," Nora replied, pulling the tablecloth from the chest. "That's not exactly a high bar." Clara finally looked at her, blue eyes sharp with calculation. "One of them is a mountain man. Young, Mother says. Not married." There it was, the real reason for the panic, the good tablecloth, the desperate attempt at presentation. Eleanor Blackridge was hunting again, and Clara was the bait. It wasn't subtle. It never had been. Every traveler, every trader, every man who passed through became a potential solution to their problems. Marry Clara off to someone with means, and maybe the rest of them could survive. It was practical in its way. Cold, but practical. Nora had stopped being hurt by it years ago. She understood the mathematics of survival. Clara was an asset. Nora was overhead. "You should change your dress," Clara said, turning back to the mirror. "That one makes you look even larger than you are." The words landed like they always did, small cuts that Nora had learned to barely feel. She looked down at herself, at the body that had never fit the frontier's narrow definition of feminine value. Too heavy, too solid, too much. I'll stick with what I have, she said. I've got work to do. She left before Clara could respond, carrying the tablecloth back to the main room where Eleanor was frantically arranging what little they had into something resembling abundance. Dried goods positioned to look plentiful, threadbare cushions fluffed to hide their wear, desperation dressed up as hospitality. Put that on the table, Eleanor ordered. And for heaven's sake, Nora, try to stay in the back when they come in. Let Clara handle the greeting. Nora spread the tablecloth without comment. She'd heard variations of this instruction her entire life. Stay in the back. Don't draw attention. Let your sister shine. She was the foundation that no one wanted to see, holding everything up while others took the credit. The door opened, bringing with it the sharp bite of October air and the smell of horses and leather and mountain pine. 3 men entered, but Nora's eyes went immediately to the one in front. He was tall, not unusual for a mountain man, but built like he'd been carved from the same granite as the peaks he came from. Broad through the shoulders, narrow at the waist, moving with the kind of confidence that came from surviving things that would kill softer men. His face was weathered, tanned dark from sun and wind, with a thick beard that couldn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw. He looked to be in his early 30s, maybe, though the frontier had a way of making men look older than they were. His eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, taking in every detail, every exit, every potential threat. The eyes of someone who'd learned that carelessness got you killed. And then those eyes found Nora. She froze, tablecloth still in her hands, suddenly aware of how she must look, flushed from work, hair a mess, dress straining at the seams. She waited for his gaze to move on, to find Clara standing in the doorway with her carefully arranged beauty. But he didn't look away. "Gentlemen?" Eleanor's voice was sugar-sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Welcome to Blackridge Trading Post. I'm Eleanor Blackridge, and this is my daughter Clara." Clara stepped forward with a practiced smile, the kind she'd perfected over years of this same performance. "We're so pleased to have you. You must be exhausted from your journey." The mountain man finally pulled his eyes from Nora and gave Clara a brief nod, polite but distant. "Cole Maddox. These are my partners, Jim Whitley and Tom Barrow." The other 2 men murmured greetings, already distracted by the goods on the shelves. They had the look of men who'd come to trade, not to socialize. "We're heading up to the high country before the snows close the passes," Cole continued. "Need to stock up on supplies, coffee, dried beans, salt pork if you have it. Ammunition." Eleanor's smile tightened slightly. Real business, then, not just an opportunity to parade Clara, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, Nora handles our inventory." "Nora?" It wasn't a request. Nora set down the tablecloth and moved behind the counter, grateful for something to do with her hands. "How long are you planning to be up there?" Cole's attention swung back to her, and she felt the weight of it, like physical pressure. "Till spring, maybe longer." "You'll want more than what you asked for, then." She pulled out the ledger, running her finger down the columns. "Winter in the high country, you'll need extra lamp oil, more flour than you think, dried fruit to prevent scurvy, medical supplies, extra blankets." One of his eyebrows rose slightly. "You know the mountains?" "I know what keeps people alive in them," she said. "My father used to guide hunters up there before—" She didn't finish. "Before he died" was implied. Cole studied her for a moment, and Nora felt something shift in the air between them. Not attraction, she wasn't naive enough to mistake this for that. But recognition, maybe. Respect. "What else?" he asked. She met his eyes, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Honestly? You're going up too late in the season. First big snow will trap you up there. And if you haven't built proper shelter beforehand, you'll freeze. You should wait until spring." Eleanor made a small, horrified sound. "You didn't tell customers they were making mistakes. You took their money and wished them luck." But Cole's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile under all that beard. "Can't wait. Got a claim to establish before someone else gets there first." "Then you better buy twice what you planned," Nora said, "and hope luck's on your side." "Don't believe in luck." He turned to his partners. "Get what she recommends. All of it." For the next hour, Nora worked. She pulled supplies, calculated costs, suggested alternatives when they were running low on something. Clara tried to help, floating around the edges with offers of coffee and conversation. But the men were focused on their purpose. They weren't here for entertainment. Cole watched Nora work with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. He asked questions, real questions, about supplies and weather patterns and trail conditions. He listened to her answers like they mattered. When Eleanor tried to insert Clara into the conversation, suggesting she could show them some of the finer goods they carried, Cole's response was polite but dismissive. "We're not interested in fine goods, ma'am. Just what we need to survive." The pile on the counter grew: coffee, flour, beans, salt, sugar, dried meat, ammunition, rope, nails, fabric for repairs, needles and thread, candles, matches sealed in wax, whiskey for medicinal purposes, tobacco. The kind of order that would actually help their struggling inventory. "That's a lot of supplies for 3 men, Nora observed, tallying the costs. 4, Cole corrected. "I'm going back for my wife first." The word hit Nora like a physical blow, though she couldn't explain why. Of course he had a wife. Men like him, capable, established, with claims and plans, they didn't stay single long on the frontier. "My condolences to her," Nora said, keeping her voice neutral. "Winter in a mountain cabin with 3 men. She'll earn her keep." Cole's expression darkened. "Don't have a wife yet. That's why I'm here." Eleanor perked up like a hound catching a scent. "Oh, well, we may be able to help you with that. Clara is—" "Mother!" Nora's voice was sharp. Even for Eleanor, this was too blatant, too desperate. But Cole wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at Nora again with that same steady, measuring gaze. "You married?" he asked. The question caught her so off guard she almost laughed. "No." "Got someone courting you?" "No." "Why not?" The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, she found herself answering with equal honesty. "Because men don't court women who look like me. They court women who look like my sister." Clara's face flushed red. Eleanor looked like she might faint, but Cole just nodded, like Nora had confirmed something he'd already suspected. "That's because most men are fools," he said. "They see a pretty face and think that's going to keep them warm when the temperature drops to 20 below. Think beauty is going to fix a roof or preserve food or keep accounts straight." He leaned against the counter, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "I've been in these mountains 8 years. I've seen what happens to the pretty delicate wives. They break. They give up. They die. Or they drag their husbands down with them." Nora's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What's your point?" "My point is, I need a wife who won't break. Someone who knows work, who understands what survival actually costs. Someone who can look at a man planning to winter in the high country and tell him straight that he's being an idiot." The room had gone completely silent. Even Cole's partners had stopped pretending to examine goods and were staring openly. "You don't even know me," Nora said. "I know you've been running this place. I know you understand inventory and accounts. I know you're not afraid to speak truth even when it's not convenient. I know you've got strength in you, the kind that matters, not the kind people toast at weddings." He straightened up, and somehow the movement made him seem even larger, more imposing. "I'm offering you a choice, Nora Blackridge. You can stay here and watch this place die slow while your mother parades your sister around hoping someone saves you, or you can come with me. Be my wife. Help me build something that lasts." "You're insane," she whispered. "Probably," he agreed. "But I'm also honest. I'm not offering you romance. I'm not promising easy. What I've got is a claim in the mountains, enough supplies to make it through winter, and a chance to build something real. You'll work harder than you've ever worked. You'll be cold, isolated, probably scared sometimes. But you'll be free of this." He gestured at the trading post, at Eleanor and Clara, at the desperation that clung to the place like smoke. "You'll be yours." Nora opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. This man, this stranger, had just walked into her life and offered her a way out. Not because he loved her, not because she was beautiful, but because she was capable. It was the most insulting and most honest proposal she'd ever heard. "I need time to think," she managed. "Don't have much time," Cole said. "We're leaving at first light. If you're coming, be ready." Eleanor found her voice finally. This is ridiculous. Nora, you can't possibly be considering… Why not? Nora turned to her mother. You've spent my whole life telling me I'm not good enough for anything better. Here's someone who thinks different. He's a stranger, a mountain man. You don't know anything about him. I know as much about him as any of the men you've tried to sell Clara to. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Clara's voice was shrill with indignation. I can't believe this. He walks in here and doesn't even look at me. That's what's bothering you? Nora felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been pressed down for too long. Not that he might be dangerous or that this is crazy, but that he didn't choose you? Well, it doesn't make sense. Clara's pretty face twisted with confusion and hurt. Why would anyone choose you over me? The question hung in the air, ugly and honest. Cole's voice cut through the tension. Because your sister's built for survival, and you're built for show. Nothing wrong with that necessarily. But I'm not looking for something to admire on a shelf. I need a partner. He picked up his hat from the counter. We'll be at the camp north of town tonight. If you decide to come, bring warm clothes and anything you can't live without. Don't bring anything you can't carry. We travel light. Then he was gone, his partners following, leaving behind a silence so thick Nora could barely breathe through it. Eleanor recovered first, her voice tight with fury. You are not seriously considering this. I don't know, Nora said honestly. Maybe. He could be anyone. A criminal, a madman, a way out, Nora interrupted. You've been trying to marry Clara off for 3 years, Mother. 3 years of parading her around, hoping someone with money would solve our problems. And now someone's offering me the same chance, and suddenly it's unacceptable? That's different. Clara is beautiful. I know. You've made that very clear my entire life. Nora's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. Here's what I know. This place is dying. We're 2 months away from losing everything. I've been holding it together with spit and prayer, and it's not enough. Clara's never going to marry someone who can save us because the men with real money don't come through here anymore. We're too far off the main routes, too run down, too desperate. She looked at her mother, really looked at her, and saw the fear beneath the anger. Eleanor knew everything Nora was saying was true. He's offering me a choice, Nora continued. Maybe it's a bad choice. Maybe I'd be trading one hard life for another, but at least it would be mine. Clara made a disgusted sound. This is pathetic. You're so desperate for attention you'll run off with the first man who looks at you. No, Nora said quietly. I'm so tired of being invisible that I'll take a chance on being seen. She walked to the room she shared with Clara and started pulling out her clothes. Not many. She didn't own much that was worth keeping. Practical dresses, warm stockings, her father's old coat that she'd altered to fit. Her hands moved automatically while her mind spun. Was she really considering this? Running off with a stranger to live in isolation in the mountains? It was insane, dangerous, completely irrational. But staying here was its own kind of death, slow and suffocating, watching the trading post crumble, watching her mother grow more desperate, watching Clara's beauty fade year by year while they all pretended there was still hope. At least with Cole Maddox, the danger was honest. She worked through the evening, finishing the daily tasks with mechanical precision, closed out the ledger, stored the perishables, banked the fires. Eleanor wouldn't speak to her, communicating only through tight-lipped silence. Clara alternated between tears and fury, demanding to know what Nora had that she didn't. Nothing, Nora finally told her. I have nothing you don't have, except maybe the willingness to work without complaining about it. That's not fair. I work. You help when Mother makes you. There's a difference. Night fell, and Nora lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. In the other bed, Clara's breathing was deliberately loud, making sure Nora knew she was awake and angry. Are you really going? Clara asked finally. I don't know. He didn't even say he loved you. I know. He doesn't think you're beautiful. I know that too. Silence for a moment. Then, in a smaller voice, what if something happens to you up there? It was the first time Clara had sounded genuinely concerned rather than just offended. Nora felt her throat tighten. Then at least something will have happened, she said. Better than nothing happening at all. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Nora rose in the dark, dressed in her warmest clothes, and packed the small bag she'd prepared, her father's old hunting knife, the only picture she had of him, a book of poetry he'd given her before he died. Not much to show for 22 years of life. She left a note for Eleanor, simple, factual, explaining where she'd gone and why. She didn't expect understanding, but she wanted there to be a record, proof that she'd made a choice. The walk to the camp north of town was cold, the pre-dawn air biting at her exposed skin. Her breath came out in clouds, and her bag felt heavier with each step. She could still turn back, could go home, burn the note, pretend this moment of madness had never happened. But her feet kept moving forward. The camp materialized out of the darkness, 3 small tents and a fire burning low. Cole was already up, checking the horse's tack with practiced efficiency. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite surprise, but maybe relief. "You came," he said. "I came." She set down her bag, suddenly unsure what happened next. "I don't know if this is brave or stupid." "Probably both." He straightened up. "Most worthwhile things are." His partners emerged from their tents, and if they were surprised to see her, they didn't show it. Jim Whitley was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and the careful movements of someone whose body had taken its share of damage. Tom Barrow was younger, nervous energy radiating off him like heat from a stove. "We doing this then?" Jim asked. Cole nodded. "We're doing this." "There's a preacher in town," Tom offered. "Saw him at the saloon last night. Could make it official before we leave." Nora's stomach dropped. A preacher, marriage, real and binding and immediate. This wasn't a courtship, wasn't a slow introduction. This was jumping off a cliff and hoping there was water below. Cole was watching her. "Your choice," he said. "We can wait if you want. Do this proper." She thought about proper. Thought about Eleanor's careful plans and Clara's practiced smiles and the slow death of waiting for something better that would never come. "No," she said. "Let's do it now." The preacher was a circuit rider named Thompson, a thin man with kind eyes who'd seen enough frontier desperation not to ask too many questions. He performed the ceremony in the back room of the saloon, with Jim and Tom as witnesses and the smell of stale whiskey hanging in the air. Nora repeated words she barely heard, feeling like she was watching herself from a distance. Cole's hand was rough and warm when he held hers, and his voice was steady when he spoke his vows. No poetry, no promises of eternal love. Just the simple legal binding of 2 people who'd made a practical agreement. When it was done, the preacher smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Cole looked at Nora, a question in his eyes. She nodded, barely, and he leaned down. The kiss was brief, almost formal, but there was something in it, a promise, maybe, or an acknowledgement. This was real now. They rode out as the sun was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that seemed too beautiful for how Nora felt. She sat behind Cole on his horse, her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his heavy coat. Behind them, the trading post grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Ahead, the mountains rose up like a wall, their peaks already white with early snow. Nora had no idea what she'd just done. No idea if she'd made the right choice or the worst mistake of her life. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than resigned acceptance. She felt alive. The mountains swallowed them whole by midday. Nora had never been this far from the trading post, had never seen terrain like this. Jagged rocks that looked like they could tear open the sky, pine forests so thick the sunlight barely penetrated, and everywhere the sense of something vast and indifferent watching them climb higher. Her thighs ached from gripping the horse, her arms tired from holding onto Cole's waist, but she didn't complain. Complaining seemed like admitting she'd made a mistake, and she wasn't ready to face that yet. They stopped at a narrow creek to water the horses. Nora slid down, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. Cole caught her elbow, steadying her without comment. His hand was gone as soon as she found her balance, already moving to check the pack animals. "We'll make camp in another few hours," he said. "There's a clearing I know, protected from the wind." Jim handed her a canteen. "Drink." Altitude gets to people who aren't used to it. She drank. The water so cold it made her teeth ache. Around them, the forest was eerily quiet except for the occasional bird call and the sound of water running over stones. Tom was already gathering deadfall for kindling, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "You all right?" Jim asked quietly. "Ask me in a week," Nora said. He laughed, a rough sound that ended in a cough. "Fair enough." They rode on. The trail, if it could even be called that, grew steeper and narrower. At one point, Nora looked down and saw nothing but empty air dropping away into a ravine that made her stomach clench with fear. Cole felt her tense. "Don't look down," he said. "Horse knows what he's doing." "That makes one of us," she muttered. She felt his chest move with what might have been a laugh. The clearing he'd mentioned turned out to be a small meadow tucked between two ridges, with a rock face on one side that would block the worst of the weather. They unpacked quickly, working with the kind of coordinated silence that came from men who'd done this together before. Nora tried to help, but mostly stayed out of the way, unsure where she fit into their practiced routine. "Start a fire," Cole said, tossing her a tinderbox. "We'll get the tents up." At least that was something she could do. She gathered the kindling Tom had collected, arranged it properly, and coaxed a flame to life. The small victory felt larger than it should have. By the time full darkness fell, they had 3 tents erected and a pot of beans heating over the fire. The temperature had dropped sharply, and Nora pulled her father's coat tighter around herself. The men ate with single-minded focus, shoveling food into their mouths like fuel rather than pleasure. "There's only 3 tents," Nora observed. "Jim and Tom share one," Cole said. "You and I take another. Third one's for supplies that can't get wet." Of course. She was married now. She'd share a tent with her husband. The reality of it hit her harder than it should have, given that she'd agreed to marry him that morning. Jim caught her expression and cleared his throat. "Cole's a gentleman. He'll give you space." "Didn't ask for that assessment, Jim," Cole said mildly. "Yeah, well, just making sure the lady knows." They cleaned up in silence, banking the fire to coals, checking that everything was secure. When Cole finally led her to their tent, Nora's heart was hammering so hard she wondered if he could hear it. The tent was small, barely enough room for 2 people to lie down side by side. Cole had already laid out 2 bedrolls with a deliberate space between them. "You take the inside," he said. "Warmer and farther from the entrance if anything comes sniffing around." "What would come sniffing around?" "Bears, mostly. Sometimes mountain lions. Nothing to worry about if we keep the food stored right." "Nothing to worry about, sure." Nora unlaced her boots with fumbling fingers, hyper-aware of Cole moving around in the confined space. He removed his gun belt, checked the rifle he'd propped near the entrance, then settled onto his bedroll with his back to her. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's a longer ride." She lay down, still wearing most of her clothes for warmth. The ground was hard beneath her, and every sound outside the tent made her flinch. An owl hooted somewhere close by. Wind rustled through the pines. Something small scurried past, making the tent fabric rustle. "Nora." Cole's voice was quiet in the darkness. "You're safe here." "How do you know?" "Because I've done this 100 times. Nothing's going to hurt you." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this stranger she'd tied her life to actually knew what he was doing. But trust wasn't something she could manufacture on command. "Why did you really ask me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. There are other women, prettier ones, younger ones, women who'd actually want to live in the mountains. Silence stretched out long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "You want the truth?" "I always want the truth. I watched you for about 10 minutes before I ever spoke. Watched how you worked, how you handled your mother trying to manipulate the situation, how you didn't flinch when you told me I was being stupid about the timing. You were the only real thing in that whole place." He shifted, and she heard the rustle of his bedroll. Most people lie. They lie about what they want, what they can do, who they are. You didn't. And up here, lies get you killed. "I could still be lying," she said. "You don't actually know me." "No, but I know desperation when I see it, and desperate people tell the truth more often than comfortable ones. You were desperate enough to be honest. That's worth more than a pretty face." It wasn't a romantic answer. Wasn't even particularly flattering, but it was honest, and that meant something. "What if I can't do this?" she asked. What if I'm not strong enough? Then we'll deal with it. But I don't think that's going to be the problem. What do you think the problem will be? Another pause. Loneliness, probably. Winter up here is long. It gets in your head. I've been lonely my whole life, Nora said. At least here I'll have a reason for it. She felt rather than saw him turn toward her in the darkness. That's a hell of a thing to say. It's true, though. You can be lonely in a room full of people who see right through you. Might as well be lonely somewhere beautiful. The mountains aren't always beautiful, Cole said. Sometimes they're brutal and ugly, and they'll break your heart just for existing. Still sounds better than where I was. He made a sound that might have been agreement. After a while, his breathing evened out into sleep. Nora lay awake much longer, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness and wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. The next week blurred into a pattern of exhaustion and endurance. They rode from dawn until dusk, climbing higher each day. The air grew thinner, the cold more biting. Nora learned to ignore the constant ache in her muscles, the way her lungs burned with each breath, the chafing from long hours in the saddle. Cole wasn't gentle about it, but he wasn't cruel either. He showed her how to pack and unpack efficiently, how to start a fire in the wind, how to filter water from streams. His teaching style was direct and practical. Do it this way. Here's why. Now you try. No coddling, but no contempt either. Jim turned out to be the camp cook, producing surprisingly edible meals from their limited supplies. He'd been in these mountains longer than anyone, he told her one night, had come west after his wife died back in Missouri. 20 years of trapping and guiding and barely surviving. Gets in your blood, he said, stirring beans in the pot. The mountains. They'll kill you if you're not careful, but they're honest about it. Not like people. Tom was younger, maybe 25, and still carried the optimism of someone who hadn't been broken yet. He talked about his claim like it was guaranteed gold, about the cabin he'd build, the life he'd make. Jim listened with the patience of someone who'd heard it all before. You ever think about going back? Nora asked Jim one evening while Cole and Tom were checking the horses. To what? He poured coffee, thick and black. Nothing left for me there. Nothing left for me anywhere but here. That's depressing. That's honest. He handed her the cup. You'll understand eventually. The mountains don't care if you're rich or poor, pretty or plain, good or bad. They just are. There's freedom in that. On the 8th day, they reached the claim. It wasn't much. A small cabin barely bigger than the trading post's storage room, half-built and abandoned by whoever had started it. The roof was incomplete, one wall sagging dangerously. Around it, the forest pressed in close, and beyond that, the mountain rose up like a wall. This is it? Nora tried to keep the dismay out of her voice. This is it, Cole confirmed. Previous owner gave up when his partner died last winter. I bought the claim off his widow. It needs work. It needs everything. He swung down from his horse, his boots crunching in the frost-stiffened grass. But the land's good. There's a stream that doesn't freeze, game in the forest, and the mineral surveys show promise. We can make something here. We. The word hung in the cold air like a challenge. They spent the next 2 weeks in a frenzy of work that made Nora's time at the trading post look leisurely. The roof had to be finished before the serious snows came. The walls needed reinforcement. They had to cut and stack enough firewood to last through months of winter, dig a proper cold storage pit, build a smokehouse for preserving meat. Nora worked until her hands bled and her body screamed. She hauled logs, mixed mortar, held boards while Cole hammered. She learned to swing an axe without taking off her own foot, learned to think 3 steps ahead so she had the right tool ready before it was needed. Cole worked like a machine, tireless and focused. He'd wake before dawn and work past dusk, pushing himself and everyone else. But he noticed things too, made sure she ate, forced breaks when he saw her swaying with exhaustion, taught her the skills she'd need to survive. You're doing good, he told her one night, his voice rough with fatigue. She looked at her ruined hands, the blisters on top of blisters, the broken nails and scraped knuckles. I feel destroyed. That's how you know you're building something. Jim and Tom had their own claim further up the mountain, but they worked on the cabin with Cole for those first crucial weeks. Safety in numbers, Jim explained. If one group didn't make it, the others could help, or at least know what went wrong. The first real snow came in mid-November. 3 days of heavy flakes that turned the world white and silent. They worked through it, desperate to get the cabin weather tight. Nora's feet went numb in her boots, her face burned from the cold and wind, but she kept moving because stopping meant giving up. On the third night of snow, they finally finished the roof. Jim produced a bottle of whiskey from somewhere, and they passed it around in celebration. Nora took a swig and nearly choked on the burn of it, but the warmth spreading through her chest felt earned. To not freezing to death, Tom said, raising the bottle. To stupid decisions that somehow work out, Jim added. Cole looked at Nora. To new beginnings. She met his eyes and saw something there she couldn't quite name. Not love. It was too soon for that, too practical. But respect, maybe. Partnership. The acknowledgement that they were in this together. To survival, she said, and drank again. Jim and Tom left the next morning, heading to their own claim before the weather closed in further. The silence they left behind was enormous. Nora stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching them disappear into the white landscape. When she could no longer see them, she turned back to find Cole banking the fire for maximum efficiency. Just us now, he said. Just us. Two strangers bound by legal papers and desperation, alone in the wilderness with winter settling in around them like a fist closing. The cabin felt smaller with just the two of them. Every sound was magnified, the scrape of a chair, the clink of a cup, the rustle of fabric. They moved around each other with careful politeness, like dancers trying not to step on each other's feet. Cole slept on one side of the cabin, Nora on the other. They maintained the fiction of privacy even though there was none to be had. She changed clothes facing the wall, he did the same. Neither mentioned it. Days developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn, start the fire, make coffee, eat whatever Jim had left them, or Nora could manage to cook. Then work, endless work. Cutting wood, checking the traps Cole had set, reinforcing the cabin's weak points, preparing for the storms they both knew were coming. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, and Cole would teach her things. How to read the weather by the clouds. Which plants were edible and which would kill you. How to field dress a rabbit. The lessons were practical, necessary for survival, but there was an intimacy to them that Nora hadn't expected. You're a good teacher, she told him one night. Had to be. No one else up here to learn from if you don't teach yourself. How long have you been doing this? 8 years in the mountains. Before that, I was in the army. Before that, on a farm in Ohio that I couldn't wait to leave. It was the most personal information he'd shared. Nora seized on it. What made you leave? His expression closed off slightly. Same thing that makes most people leave. Nothing there for me. No family? Had a brother. He died at Shiloh. I'm sorry. Long time ago. He poked at the fire, sending up sparks. What about you? Your father, you said he used to guide hunters. Before he fell off a roof trying to fix a leak he couldn't afford to hire someone else to fix. The bitterness surprised her with its intensity. He worked himself to death trying to keep that trading post alive. And for what? So my mother could spend the next 3 years slowly losing everything he built? You angry about that? I'm angry about a lot of things. She pulled her blanket tighter. I'm angry he died. I'm angry my mother only sees me as useful. I'm angry my sister got to be beautiful while I got to be capable. I'm angry this is what my life became. But you chose this, Cole pointed out. You didn't have to come with me. I chose between bad options. That's not the same as choosing something good. Maybe not, but at least you chose. They fell into silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners. The sound of it was lonely and vast, a reminder of how small they were, how isolated. Are you happy? Nora asked suddenly. Up here, I mean. With this life? Cole considered the question seriously. Happy's not the word I'd use. Satisfied, maybe. I know what I am here. I know my purpose. That's more than most people get. Is it enough? Has to be. He looked at her then, really looked, and Nora felt the weight of his attention like heat. What about you? You satisfied? I don't know yet. Ask me when winter's over. Might not make it to ask. She knew he was half joking, but the truth in it made her chest tight. They might not make it. People died up here all the time, from cold, from accidents, from simple bad luck. They were betting their lives on their ability to endure. If we don't make it, she said slowly, at least we went down swinging. Cole's mouth curved into something like a smile. There's that honesty again. The first real storm hit 3 days later. It came in fast, the temperature dropping so quickly Nora could feel it in her bones. The wind screamed like something alive and angry, battering the cabin until she was sure the roof would tear off despite all their work. They spent 2 days trapped inside, venturing out only to bring in firewood and check that the structure was holding. The cabin leaked cold air through every crack, and no matter how high they built the fire, Nora couldn't get warm. On the second night, shivering so hard her teeth chattered, she finally broke. I can't feel my feet, she said. Cole looked up from the piece of leather he was working. Come here. She hesitated, then moved closer to the fire where he sat. He pulled off her boots. She'd kept them on for warmth, and made a disapproving sound when he saw her soaked stockings. You'll get frostbite like this. He pulled off the stockings without ceremony, his hands rough but efficient. Then he did something that shocked her. He took her feet and placed them against his chest, under his shirt, against his warm skin. Cole, save it. You need heat. The warmth of him was almost painful against her frozen skin. She sat there, mortified and grateful in equal measure, while he continued working on the leather as if this were completely normal. My wife. My first wife, he said suddenly. She froze to death because she was too proud to ask for help when she was cold. Nora went still. You were married before. 3 years. She was a town girl, came west with her family. Thought she could handle frontier life. His hands stilled on the leather. She couldn't. Got sick the first winter, wouldn't admit how bad it was. By the time I realized, it was too late. How long ago? 4 years? Long enough that I should be over it. Not long enough that I am. Is that why you wanted someone capable? Someone who wouldn't break? Part of it. He looked at her feet, still pressed against his chest. Other part is I'm tired of pretending survival is romantic. It's not. It's brutal and ugly, and it breaks people. I needed someone who understood that going in. I'm not her, Nora said quietly. I know. That's why you're here. He met her eyes. But you need to tell me when something's wrong. Pride's not worth dying for. The storm lasted 3 more days. They ran low on food, rationing what they had. The cold was relentless, seeping into everything. Nora learned what it meant to be truly uncomfortable, to have every part of her body ache with cold and hunger and exhaustion. But she also learned what it meant to depend on someone. Cole shared his warmth without complaint, taught her how to layer clothes properly, showed her how to exercise in small bursts to keep the blood moving. They huddled together for heat like animals, survival stripping away any pretense of propriety. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was transformed. Snow piled higher than Nora's waist in places, the landscape sculpted into strange new shapes. The sky was painfully blue, the sun reflecting off the snow so bright it hurt to look at. They dug themselves out slowly, clearing a path to the woodpile, checking the traps, assessing damage. The cold storage pit was fine. The smokehouse had lost part of its roof. The horses had survived, though they were thin and stressed. This was a small one, Cole said, surveying the damage. The real storms come in January. Nora wanted to laugh or cry, or both. If that had been small, what would large look like? They fell into the work of recovery, and something shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained eroded under the reality of survival. They worked closer, touched more easily, spoke more freely. Nora found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, about feeling invisible, about watching her sister receive everything she'd wanted, about the bone-deep loneliness of being needed but not valued. Cole listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything. Sometimes he'd share his own stories in return, about the brother who died, about the wife who couldn't adapt, about the years of wandering before he found these mountains. One night, a month into their isolation, Nora woke to find Cole standing at the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing. Couldn't sleep." She got up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and joined him. The night was eerily beautiful, the snow glowing silver, the forest dark and still. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Coming here?" She thought about lying, thought about saying what she was supposed to say, but they'd built something on honesty, and she wouldn't break it now. Sometimes, she admitted, when I'm so cold I can't think, or so tired I want to cry, or so isolated I forget what other people's voices sound like. In those moments, I regret it. And the other times? The other times I think this might be the first real choice I ever made. That counts for something. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm glad you came. The words were simple, almost awkward, but they hit Nora with unexpected force. She'd spent her whole life being useful, being necessary, but rarely being wanted. This was different. This mattered. I'm glad too, she said, and meant it. Outside, the wind picked up again, promising another storm. But inside the cabin, with the fire burning and Cole standing beside her, Nora felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she might actually survive this. But survival turned out to be more complicated than just enduring the cold. December came in hard, and with it a loneliness that pressed against Nora's chest like a physical weight. Days blurred together in endless sameness. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. The sun barely cleared the horizon before sliding back down, leaving them in twilight for most of the day. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the wind and the occasional crack of ice in the trees. Cole grew quieter as the days shortened, retreating into himself in a way that made Nora nervous. He still did the work, still taught her what she needed to know. But something had shifted. He'd go hours without speaking, staring into the fire with an expression she couldn't read. "You all right?" she asked one evening when the silence had stretched too long. "Fine." "You don't seem fine." He looked at her then, and there was something raw in his eyes. "Winter does this. Gets in your head. I told you that. What does it make you think about?" "Things I can't change." He stood abruptly, grabbed his coat. "Need to check the traps." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in the cabin with nothing but the fire and her own thoughts. She understood the impulse. Sometimes the walls felt like they were closing in, the isolation suffocating. But it scared her too, watching him pull away. When he came back 2 hours later, his face was red from the cold and his movements stiff. He'd pushed himself too hard, stayed out too long. Nora heated water for coffee without comment, waited while he thawed by the fire. "I think about her," he said finally. "My first wife. How she'd sit by the window during storms, crying because she wanted to go home. How I'd tell her it would get easier, knowing I was lying. How she looked at me near the end like I'd tricked her into this." Nora's throat tightened. "Did you?" "Maybe. I wanted to believe love would be enough to make her adapt. Turned out I was wrong." He took the coffee she offered. "She died hating me, hating this place, hating what her life had become." "I don't hate you," Nora said quietly. "Yet. I'm not her, Cole. I knew what I was getting into." No one knows what they're getting into, not really, not until they're in the middle of it, and it's too late to get out. The bleakness in his voice shook her. This was different from his usual pragmatism, darker and more dangerous. She'd seen men back at the trading post slip into this kind of darkness during long winters, saw how it ate at them until there was nothing left. "Talk to me," she said. "Don't shut me out." "What's there to talk about? We're stuck here until spring, nothing to do but survive and hope we don't go crazy doing it." "Then tell me about before, about your brother, about Ohio, about anything that isn't these four walls." He looked at her like she'd suggested something impossible, but after a long moment he started talking. About growing up on a farm that never quite produced enough. About a father who drank and a mother who died when he was 12. About a brother named Thomas, who'd been his best friend and worst enemy in equal measure. "We enlisted together," Cole said. "Thought war would be an adventure. Thought we'd come home heroes." His laugh was bitter. "Tom died in a field hospital from an infection in his leg. Not even a dramatic death, just slow and painful and pointless." "How old were you?" 23. Old enough to know better, too young to care." Nora listened as he talked about the years after, drifting west, taking jobs that didn't matter, trying to outrun something he couldn't name. Meeting a girl in a Colorado mining town who seemed strong enough to handle frontier life. Marrying her because it seemed like the thing to do, because loneliness was worse than risk. I told myself I wouldn't do that again, he said. Wouldn't ask someone to live this life unless they understood what it cost. That's why I was so blunt with you. No romance, no lies, just the truth. I appreciated that, Nora said. I still do. Do you? He met her eyes. Or are you just saying what you think I need to hear? I'm saying what's true. You think I'd rather be back at the trading post, watching my mother scheme and my sister preen, listening to them talk about me like I was furniture. She shook her head. At least here, when you look at me, you actually see me. Something shifted in his expression. I do see you, that's the problem. What do you mean? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I didn't expect to care. Thought this would be practical, mutually beneficial. Two people helping each other survive, but you... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You're not what I expected. Nora's heart was pounding. Is that bad? I don't know. Caring about people hasn't worked out well for me in the past. So what are you saying? You want to go back to being strangers? No. The word came out harsh. That's the problem. I don't want that at all. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Nora didn't know what to do with this confession, didn't know how to navigate the space between practical partnership and something more complicated. I care too, she said finally. I didn't mean to, but I do. Cole stood abruptly, and for a moment she thought he'd leave again. Instead, he crossed the small space between them and pulled her up from her chair. His hands were rough on her arms, his face close enough that she could see the faint scars on his cheekbone, the gray starting in his beard. This is a mistake, he said. Probably. He kissed her then, and it wasn't gentle or romantic. It was desperate and hungry, the kiss of two people who'd been alone too long and were terrified of being alone again. Nora kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, all the careful distance they'd maintained burning away in an instant. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he said. Neither do I. We could mess everything up. We could. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But we could also figure it out. They didn't talk about it after that night, but something fundamental had changed. The distance was gone, replaced by a closeness that was both terrifying and necessary. They moved around each other differently now, small touches that lingered, looks that meant something, a physical awareness that made the small cabin feel even smaller. Cole stopped sleeping on the opposite side of the room. It happened gradually, his bedroll moving closer each night until there was no pretense left. They'd lie together in the darkness, sharing warmth and silence, and Nora would feel something in her chest that she didn't have a name for. Christmas came and went without ceremony. They had no decorations, no special food, nothing to mark the day as different from any other. But Cole surprised her by carving a small wooden bird, rough but recognizable, and presenting it to her without explanation. It's a wren, he said. They survive winter when bigger birds don't. Reminded me of you. Nora turned the carving over in her hands, something hot and uncomfortable building behind her eyes. No one had given her something just because before. Everything had always been practical, necessary, functional. Thank you, she managed. It's not much. It's enough. January proved Cole right about the storms. They came one after another, each worse than the last, burying the cabin under snow that had to be constantly cleared to keep from being trapped inside. The cold was vicious, the kind that made your lungs hurt and your bones ache. They burned through firewood faster than planned, and Cole started rationing it, keeping the fire lower to make the supply last. The cold seeped into everything. Nora's hands cracked and bled from the dry air and constant work. Her lips split. Her feet were never fully warm. She wore every piece of clothing she owned in layers and still shivered. One morning, she woke feeling wrong. Her head pounded. Her throat was raw. And when she tried to sit up, the room spun. Stay down, Cole said, his hand on her shoulder. You're burning up. I'm fine. But her voice came out as a croak, and even that small effort exhausted her. You're not fine. You're sick. Panic flashed through Cole's eyes, quick and sharp before he buried it. Nora saw it anyway, understood what it meant. Up here, sickness could kill. There was no doctor, no medicine beyond what they'd brought, no help coming. Just need to rest, she said, but the words felt thick in her mouth. Cole's jaw tightened. I'm not losing you. The intensity in his voice cut through the fog in her head. This wasn't just concern. This was fear. Over the next 2 days, Nora slipped in and out of consciousness. The fever climbed until she was delirious, seeing things that weren't there, calling out for people long dead. Cole stayed with her constantly, forcing water down her throat, cooling her burning skin with snow, refusing to let her slip away. She was vaguely aware of him talking to her, his voice rough and desperate. Come on, Nora, stay with me. You don't get to leave. You hear me? You promised you wouldn't break. But her body didn't care about promises. The fever raged, her lungs filled with fluid, and breathing became a battle she wasn't sure she'd win. On the third night, something in her broke open. She was back at the trading post, watching her father climb that damned roof. She tried to call out, to warn him, but no sound came. Then she was at the altar again, looking at Cole's face as he made his vows, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Then she was nowhere, floating in darkness so complete it felt like drowning. Cole's voice cut through it all. Breathe, damn it. Just breathe. She focused on that voice, used it like a rope to pull herself back. Her eyes opened to find him leaning over her, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. There you are, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. How long? Her throat felt like raw meat. 3 days. Thought I'd lost you twice. She tried to sit up, but he pushed her back down gently. Not yet. You're still weak. You look terrible, she croaked. Yeah, well, haven't slept much. He pressed a cup of water to her lips. Drink. She did, the water painful going down but desperately needed. When she'd finished, she saw the wreckage around them. The fire burned too high despite the need to ration wood, blankets piled on her that should have been stored, Cole's bedroll pulled right next to hers. You stayed, she said. Where else would I go? You could have frozen out there. Used up all the wood keeping me warm. I don't care about the wood. His hand found hers, gripped tight enough to hurt. I told you, I'm not losing you. Something in the way he said it made her understand. This wasn't about practical partnership anymore. This wasn't about survival or convenience. Somewhere in the long dark winter, in the isolation and hardship and desperate honesty, it had become something else entirely. Cole, don't. His voice was harsh. Don't say anything. Just get better. She did slowly. It took a week before she could stand without her legs shaking, another week before she could do light work. Cole watched her like a hawk, ready to catch her if she fell, pushing food on her even when she insisted she wasn't hungry. The fever had taken something from her, left her weaker, more fragile than she'd been before. It terrified her, this reminder that her body could betray her, that all her strength and determination might not be enough. What if it happens again? She asked one night, watching Cole repair a trap by firelight. Then we deal with it. You can't watch me every minute. Watch me. He didn't look up from his work. I've already lost one wife to this place. I'm not losing another. I'm not her. I know, that's why I'm not letting you die. The fierceness in his voice should have comforted her. Instead, it made her angry. You don't get to decide that. You can't control everything, Cole. Sometimes people die, and there's nothing you can do about it. His hand stilled on the trap. You think I don't know that? I held my brother while he died, watched my wife fade away. I know exactly how powerless I am. He looked at her then, eyes blazing. But I'm not giving up without a fight. Not this time. What if fighting isn't enough? Then at least I fought. He set down the trap. You asked me once if I was happy. I told you satisfied was the best I could do. But these last few months with you, sick or healthy, scared or brave, it's been more than satisfaction. And I'll be damned if I let that go without doing everything I can to keep it. Nora's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I didn't plan to, didn't want to, but there it is. He stood, crossing to where she sat. I love you, Nora. Your strength, your honesty, the way you don't pretend things are fine when they're falling apart. The way you look at these mountains like they might kill you, but you're going to try anyway. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. You're supposed to be practical, not romantic. Yeah, well, turns out I'm bad at my own rules. He cupped her face in his rough hands. I love you, and if you die on me, I'll never forgive you. She laughed, the sound catching on a sob. That's the worst declaration of love I've ever heard. It's honest. It is. She reached up, covering his hands with hers. I love you too. Your terrible moods, your blunt honesty, the way you look at me like I matter, even when you're being an overbearing ass about keeping me alive. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she might break. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. We're going to make it, he said. Both of us. Through winter, through whatever comes next. We're going to make it. Nora wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and determination would be enough to overcome the brutal reality of frontier life. But she'd seen too much death, too much failure, to take anything for granted. I hope you're right, she said. I am. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. I have to be. February came in cruel, the storms relentless and vicious. They ran low on everything: food, firewood, patience. The isolation grounded them both, making small irritations feel enormous. They'd snap at each other over nothing, then apologize, then snap again. One night, after a particularly bitter fight about whether they could afford to heat water for washing, Cole grabbed his rifle and left. Nora sat by the dying fire, furious and frightened in equal measure. When he came back 3 hours later with a deer he'd managed to kill, she wanted to scream at him for taking such a risk in the dark. Instead, she helped him dress it, working in tense silence. I'm sorry, he said finally, his hands bloody to the wrists. About earlier. Me too. This is harder than I thought it would be. The winter or us? Both. He looked at her across the deer's carcass. But I don't regret it. Any of it. Even when I'm being impossible? Especially then. His mouth quirked. Means you're still fighting. They worked together to preserve the meat, smoking what they could, storing the rest in the frozen ground. It would help stretch their supplies, maybe get them through to spring. Maybe. March arrived with false promises of warmth, days where the sun felt almost strong, nights where the temperature still dropped below zero. The snow started to melt in patches, revealing the brown grass beneath. Nora felt something loosen in her chest, hope maybe, or just relief that they'd made it this far. But hope was dangerous on the frontier. She woke one morning to find Cole standing at the window again, staring out at the brightening landscape. Something in his posture made her uneasy. What's wrong? Jim and Tom should have checked on us by now, should have come down when the weather broke. Maybe they're just being cautious. Maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. I need to go up there, check on them. Fear spiked through her. That's a full day's journey in good weather. The snow's still too deep in places. Which is why I need to go. If something's wrong, you going up there won't change it. She climbed out of bed, her body still weak from the illness that had nearly killed her. And if something happens to you, I'm stuck here alone. You're strong enough to make it to town if you had to. That's not the point. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. The point is I don't want to be alone. I don't want to lose you. His expression softened. I'll be careful. That's what people always say before they die doing something stupid. Nora, no. Listen to me. I know you feel responsible for them. I know you need to check. But if you go up there and something happens, I will never forgive you. Do you understand? Never. He pulled her close, holding her tight. I'll be back. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm keeping this one. He kissed the top of her head. 2 days. If I'm not back in 2 days, you head for town. She wanted to argue more, to demand he stay, to make him see reason, but she understood duty and loyalty, understood the weight of responsibility. If their positions were reversed, she'd do the same thing. 2 days, she agreed, not a minute more. He left at dawn, taking one of the horses and enough supplies for the journey. Nora watched until he disappeared into the tree line, then forced herself to turn back to the cabin and the work that never ended. The first day passed in agonizing slowness. She kept herself busy, mending clothes, organizing supplies, reinforcing the parts of the cabin that had weakened over winter. Every sound outside made her freeze, hoping it was Cole returning early. The second day was worse. She couldn't focus, couldn't settle, couldn't stop imagining everything that could go wrong. A fall through weak ice, an encounter with a hungry bear, getting lost in the still treacherous terrain, each scenario more horrible than the last. When darkness fell on the second day with no sign of him, Nora prepared to leave. She packed what she'd need for the journey to town, said goodbye to the cabin they'd built together, and tried not to think about what it meant that he hadn't returned. She was saddling the remaining horse when she heard it, hoofbeats approaching fast. Cole burst into the clearing, his horse lathered and blowing hard. He was off the animal before it had fully stopped, crossing to her in long strides. "They're dead," he said. "Both of them. Cabin collapsed under the snow. Must have happened weeks ago." Nora felt the news hit her like a physical blow. Jim with his rough kindness, Tom with his optimism, gone. "I'm sorry," she said. Cole's face was hard, carved from stone. They were good men, didn't deserve that. No one deserves that. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the fear beneath the hardness. "I could have lost you too. If you'd been just a little weaker, if the fever had been just a little worse. But I wasn't. I'm here. We're both here." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I can't do this alone. Can't survive up here alone. I tried before and it nearly killed me." "You're not alone." She held him back just as fiercely. "I'm not going anywhere." They stood like that in the cold March darkness, two people clinging to each other against the weight of everything they'd endured and everything they still might face. The mountains had taken so much from them both: family, security, any illusion of safety. But somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other in the wreckage. And for now, broken and battered as they were, that had to be enough. They buried Jim and Tom when the ground thawed enough to dig. It took 3 days of hard work, the earth still half frozen and resistant. Cole worked with grim determination, barely speaking, his face set in lines that made him look 10 years older. Nora helped where she could, but mostly she watched him destroy himself with grief and guilt. He blamed himself for not checking on them sooner, for not insisting they winter together, for every decision that had led to two men dying alone in a collapsed cabin. "You couldn't have known," she told him on the third night, when he came back to their cabin with bloody hands from digging. "I should have known, should have checked the snow load on their roof, should have made sure they had enough support beams." He slumped into a chair, exhausted. "They were my responsibility. They were grown men making their own choices. Doesn't matter. I brought them up here, told them it would work out." Nora knelt in front of him, taking his damaged hands in hers. "You can't save everyone, Cole. You can barely save yourself most days." "Then what's the point?" His voice was raw. "What's the point of any of this if we're all just going to die anyway?" "The point is, we're not dead yet." She squeezed his hands, making him look at her. "We made it through winter, both of us, against odds that should have killed us. That has to mean something. Or it just means we got lucky and they didn't." She wanted to argue, to find words that would pull him out of this darkness. But she understood it too well, the survivor's guilt, the questioning of every choice, the fear that luck would run out. She'd felt it herself when the fever broke and she realized she could have died, leaving Cole alone exactly like his first wife had. "Come to bed," she said instead. "You're no good to anyone like this." He let her lead him to their bedroll, let her help him out of his filthy clothes. They lay together in the darkness, and she felt him shake with something that might have been tears or just exhaustion. She held him through it, offering the only comfort she could, her presence, her warmth, proof that he wasn't alone. The next morning, they finished the graves. Cole made rough markers from split logs, carving the names with painstaking care. Jim Whitley, Tom Barrow. No dates, no flowery words, just names to mark that they'd existed, that they'd tried. "Should say something," Cole said, standing between the graves. "What do you want to say?" He was quiet for a long time, then, "They were good men, deserve better than this. Hope wherever they are it's warmer." It wasn't poetry, but it was honest. Nora added her own words. "Thank you for the kindness you showed me, for making me feel welcome when I had no right to expect it. I won't forget that." They stood in silence for a while, the mountain wind cold against their faces. Then Cole turned away, and and Nora knew the moment of mourning was over. There was still work to do, still survival to manage. The dead were buried, but the living had to keep moving. April brought real warmth finally, the kind that made Nora believe winter might actually be over. The snow retreated rapidly, revealing a landscape that looked damaged and raw. Fallen trees, damaged structures, the bones of animals that hadn't made it through. They inventoried what was left of their supplies, not much. The winter had consumed almost everything. They'd need to get to town soon, restock before they could start any real work on the claim. "We should sell Jim and Tom's claim," Cole said one evening. "Use the money for supplies." "Is that legal?" "They didn't have family. Someone needs to file it. Might as well be us. Better than letting claim jumpers take it." It was practical, but Nora heard the guilt beneath it. Using dead men's claims to fund their own survival. Necessary, maybe, but it tasted wrong. What about their things? Did they have anything worth keeping? Some tools, a few personal items. He looked at her. Found a letter Tom was writing to his mother. Never finished it. "Are you going to send it to her?" "Don't know where she is. He talked about Missouri, but that's a big place." Cole's jaw tightened. "She'll spend the rest of her life wondering what happened to him. That's the frontier. People just disappear." Nora thought about Eleanor and Clara back at the trading post. Did they wonder about her? Did they care? Or had they just moved on, finding someone else to parade in front of potential husbands? Someone else to do the work Nora had left behind? "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked. "Just to visit? Let them know you're alive." "No." The answer was immediate and firm. That life's done. No point looking backward. But Nora found herself thinking about it more as spring settled in. Not about going back exactly, but about what she'd left behind. The trading post had probably failed by now. Eleanor and Clara were likely destitute, maybe living on charity or married off in desperation. Part of her felt guilty for abandoning them. A larger part felt relief that their problems weren't hers anymore. They made the trip to town in early May, leading both horses loaded with furs Cole had trapped over the winter. The journey took 2 days, and Nora was shocked by how much the landscape had changed. What had been impassable snowdrifts were now rushing streams. The trail was mud and fallen branches, treacherous in new ways. Town was exactly as she remembered, rough, loud, and crowded with people who all looked like they were barely holding on. They sold the furs for less than they'd hoped, filed the claim for Jim and Tom's land, and bought supplies with the money they'd made. Cole handled the business with his usual efficiency, but Nora saw how people looked at him. With respect, yes, but also distance. He was the man whose partners had died over winter. Bad luck, people whispered. Maybe cursed. "Don't listen to them," Nora said when she caught him overhearing the gossip. "Hard not to when they're right." "They're not right. They're superstitious idiots looking for someone to blame." But the damage was done. Cole pulled further into himself, became more withdrawn. That night, in the room they'd rented above the saloon, he sat by the window staring out at the muddy street. "Maybe we should go back east," he said suddenly. "Cash out the claims, find somewhere easier." Nora's stomach dropped. "You don't mean that." "Why not? What are we doing up here? Working ourselves to death for what? A chance at gold that probably doesn't exist? Land that might kill us before we can prove it? We're building something. You said that yourself." "I say a lot of things." He turned to look at her, and the defeat in his eyes scared her more than any storm had. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this whole thing was just another mistake." She crossed to him, grabbing his face in both hands. "Listen to me. You are not giving up. Not after everything we survived. Not after Jim and Tom died so we could keep their claim. You want to dishonor their memory, quit now and prove everyone right about bad luck and curses?" "Nora, No, I didn't come all this way, didn't nearly die, didn't fall in love with you just to watch you give up because some idiots in town are running their mouths." She was shaking with anger and fear. "You told me you weren't a quitter. Prove it." Something flickered in his eyes, anger maybe, or shame, or just a spark of the stubbornness she knew was in there somewhere. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not a chance." He pulled her hands away from his face, but didn't let go of them. "You should have married someone easier." "Probably. But I married you, so you're stuck with me." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Stuck with you. That's romantic. I told you, I'm practical, not romantic. This time he did smile, small and tired, but real. Yeah, I remember. They stayed in town 3 more days, and Nora watched Cole carefully for signs he was still thinking about quitting. But whatever crisis had gripped him seemed to have passed. He made plans for the summer work, talked about building an addition to the cabin, even mentioned the possibility of bringing in help next year if the claim proved out. On their last night, they sat in the saloon drinking bad whiskey and listening to a piano player murder a song that might have been beautiful once. I'm sorry, Cole said quietly. About earlier. About talking about quitting. Everyone has moments like that. Not me. Not usually. He stared into his glass. Losing Jim and Tom, it reminded me how fast everything can fall apart, how much I have to lose now. You mean me? Yeah, you. He looked at her then, and the vulnerability in his face took her breath away. I've been alone most of my life, Nora. Even when I was married before, even when I had my brother, I was alone in my head. But with you, I'm not. And that's terrifying. Why? Because if something happens to you, I don't know if I could survive it. Not again. Nora reached across the table, lacing her fingers through his. Then we better make sure nothing happens to either of us. That's not always up to us. No, but we can try. She squeezed his hand. We're good at surviving, you and me. We'll keep doing it. He raised his glass with his free hand. To surviving. She raised hers. To being too stubborn to die. They clinked glasses and drank, and for a moment everything felt possible again. The ride back to the claim was easier than the journey down, the trail drying out and the weather holding fair. When they crested the final ridge and saw their cabin sitting solid in the clearing, Nora felt something swell in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or just relief that it was still standing. They fell into the work of summer with renewed energy. Cole started construction on the addition, a second room that would give them more space, maybe a place for storage or even children someday, though neither of them said that out loud. Nora took over the garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with stubborn determination. The days were long and exhausting, but in a different way than winter had been. This was productive exhaustion, the kind that came from building rather than just surviving. They'd work from dawn until their hands were too tired to hold tools, then collapse together and sleep hard. But Nora noticed she was more tired than usual. At first, she blamed it on the work, on pushing herself too hard after the illness that had nearly killed her. Then she blamed the heat, the altitude, anything but the obvious truth that was becoming harder to ignore. She missed her monthly bleeding, once, then twice. Her breasts ached, her stomach turned at smells that had never bothered her before. And some mornings she could barely get out of bed without her head spinning. She'd seen enough pregnant women at the trading post to know the signs, had helped her mother tend to travelers who'd been in the family way, listened to their complaints and fears and hopes. She knew what was happening to her body. What she didn't know was how to tell Cole. They were eating dinner one evening when the nausea hit her hard and fast. She barely made it outside before vomiting up everything she'd eaten. Cole followed, holding her hair back, his hand steady on her shoulder. That's the third time this week, he said when she'd finished. You sick again? No, She straightened up, wiping her mouth. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. Cole's hand on her shoulder went very still. You're sure? Pretty sure. All the signs are there. He was quiet for so long she couldn't stand it. She turned to face him, trying to read his expression in the fading light. He looked stunned, maybe scared, definitely overwhelmed. Say something, she said. I don't know what to say. He ran a hand through his hair. A baby. Out here. That's dangerous. I know, stupid probably. We can barely take care of ourselves, much less a child. I was going to say terrifying. That too. She wrapped her arms around herself. If you want me to go to town, find someone who might… No. The word came out sharp. No, we're not doing that. Cole, be realistic. Having a baby up here with no doctor, no help. I said no. He grabbed her shoulders, making her look at him. We're keeping this baby. We'll figure it out. How? We nearly died this winter. What happens when I'm too pregnant to work? When the baby comes and I'm laid up? What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it, same as we've dealt with everything else. His grip tightened. I'm scared too, Nora. Terrified, if I'm honest. But I'm not losing this. I'm not losing you or this baby. Tears burned in her eyes. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice. We chose this life. We chose each other. Now we choose this baby, and we make it work. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and determination would be enough. But she'd seen too many women die in childbirth, too many babies born too early or too weak or just unlucky. The frontier didn't care about what you wanted or how hard you tried. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. He pulled her against his chest, holding her tight. I am too, but we're doing this anyway. The summer took on new urgency after that. Cole worked like a man possessed, finishing the addition in record time, then starting on a root cellar, a better smokehouse, reinforcements to the cabin that would make it safer for a baby. He was preparing for winter and for birth in equal measure, trying to control everything he could. Nora's body changed in ways that were both miraculous and miserable. The nausea faded after a few months, replaced by an appetite that seemed bottomless. Her belly swelled, her back ached, her feet were constantly swollen. She couldn't work as hard as before, and that frustrated her more than the physical discomfort. I'm useless, she complained one day, watching Cole haul logs while she sat in the shade. You're growing a human, that's not useless. I should be helping. You are helping. You're keeping yourself and the baby healthy. That's the most important job right now. But she could see the strain on him, trying to do the work of two people. He never complained, never made her feel guilty, but she felt it anyway. This was supposed to be a partnership, and now she was dead weight. One evening in late summer, when the heat was finally breaking and the first hints of fall touched the air, Nora felt the baby move for the first time. A flutter, so light she almost missed it, then a stronger push that made her gasp. What's wrong? Cole was at her side instantly. Nothing. The baby, it's moving. She grabbed his hand, pressing it to her belly. Here, feel. They waited in silence, his rough palm warm against her skin. Then the baby moved again, a definite kick that made them both freeze. Cole's face transformed. The worry, the exhaustion, the constant tension all melted away, replaced by something Nora had never seen before. Wonder. Pure, simple wonder. That's our baby, he said, his voice rough. That's our baby. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to her belly. Hey there, little one. Your mama and I are doing our best to get ready for you. Try not to be in too much of a hurry, all right? Nora's throat tightened with emotion. This hard man, this survivor who'd seen so much death and loss, talking to their unborn child with such gentleness. We're going to be terrible at this, she said. Probably. He looked up at her. But we'll figure it out. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Fall came too fast, the days shortening with alarming speed. Cole worked even harder, desperate to finish everything before the snow trapped them again. Nora helped where she could, but her body was getting in the way more and more. She was huge now, her belly so large she could barely see her own feet. When do you think it'll come? Cole asked one night, his hand resting on her stomach. January, maybe? February at the latest. His jaw tightened. The worst months. The deepest cold. The heaviest snows, when they'd be most isolated. If something went wrong, there'd be no getting help. We need supplies, he said. Medical supplies. And someone who knows about birthing. There's no one up here who knows about birthing. Then we go to town, find a midwife who'll come up for the winter. No one's going to do that, not for any amount of money. Then you come to town. Stay there until after the baby comes. Nora sat up, which took some maneuvering given her size. Absolutely not. Nora, I'm not leaving you up here alone. Not after what happened to Jim and Tom. And I'm not having this baby in some boarding house surrounded by strangers. It's safer. Maybe. But it's not what I want. She grabbed his hand. I want to have this baby here, in the home we built. With you beside me. That's worth the risk. Not if you die. I'm not going to die. You don't know that. Neither do you. She squeezed his hand. Cole, we've been gambling with our lives since the day we met. This is just another bet. He looked at her like she was crazy, like he wanted to lock her up until she saw reason, but he also knew her well enough by now to know when she'd made up her mind. "If something goes wrong," he started, "then you do everything you can, same as always, but I'm not leaving." He pulled her close as her belly would allow, and she felt him shaking. "I can't lose you, can't lose either of you." "You won't. Promise me." She wanted to give him that certainty, that comfort, but she'd learned the hard way that some promises couldn't be kept. "I promise I'll fight," she said instead, "as hard as I can, for as long as I can. That's all I can give you." He held her tighter. "Then that'll have to be enough." October brought the first serious snow, and with it, the knowledge that they were committed now. No leaving, no changing their minds. Whatever happened would happen here, in this cabin, with just the two of them. Cole had done everything he could to prepare. He'd stockpiled medical supplies bought from the town doctor, clean cloth, alcohol, herbs that might help with pain. He'd talked to every woman in town who'd given birth, taking notes like he was studying for an exam. He'd even practiced on one of the barn cats, delivering her kittens with shaking hands until he understood the mechanics of birth. Nora watched him prepare with a mixture of love and terror. He was trying so hard to control something that couldn't be controlled, trying to save her from a danger that might not be survivable. "You know it might not matter," she told him one night. "All this preparation, things can still go wrong." "I know, but at least I tried." "Is that going to be enough? If the worst happens, is knowing you tried going to help?" He looked at her, his face drawn. "No, but it's all I've got." The baby moved under her ribs, a rolling sensation that was becoming familiar. Strong kicks, constant movement. Active, Cole said. That was good. Active meant healthy. Nora hoped he was right. November and December passed in a blur of waiting and worry. Every twinge made her wonder if this was it, if labor was starting. Cole watched her like a hawk, jumping at every groan or shift in position. "You're making me nervous," she finally told him. "You should be nervous." "I am, but your anxiety on top of mine is too much." He tried to hide it better after that, but she could still see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way he checked on her constantly, the fear that lived in his eyes. On a bitter cold night in mid-January, Nora woke to a pain low in her back that made her catch her breath. She lay still, waiting to see if it would pass. It didn't. Instead, it wrapped around to her belly, squeezing hard enough to make her gasp. "Cole?" Her voice came out shaky. "Cole, wake up." He was awake instantly. "What's wrong?" "I think—" Another pain hit, stronger this time. "I think it's time." She saw the fear flash across his face, saw him fight it back and replace it with determination. He'd been preparing for this moment for months. Now he had to prove all that preparation meant something. "All right," he said, his voice steadier than his hands. "All right. We can do this." Nora wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that they'd survive this like they'd survived everything else. But as another contraction hit, stronger and longer than the last, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the test that would finally break them. The labor lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of pain that rewrote Nora's understanding of what a body could endure. It started manageable, sharp but bearable, waves she could breathe through. Cole timed the contractions with his pocket watch, his face grave as they grew closer together. By hour 6, manageable had become brutal. Nora paced the cabin when she could, gripped the bedpost when she couldn't, and tried not to scream because screaming took energy she couldn't spare. "You're doing good," Cole said, wiping sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. "Liar." The word came out as a gasp between contractions. "All right, you're suffering like hell, but you're still alive. That's something." Despite everything, she almost laughed. Trust Cole to be honest even now. By hour 12, Nora had lost all sense of time. There was only pain and the brief respites between, getting shorter each time. She was exhausted, her body shaking with fatigue, and the baby still hadn't come. "Something's wrong," she managed during a break. "Nothing's wrong. Labor takes time." "Too much time, I can feel it. Something's not right." Cole's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Let me check." What he found made his face go pale. The baby was turned wrong, one shoulder caught. He'd read about this, had asked the town doctor what to do if it happened. The answer had been grim. Sometimes the mother died, sometimes the baby, sometimes both. "Can you fix it?" Nora asked, seeing the fear in his eyes. "I can try." "Then try, because I'm not dying in this cabin, and neither is our baby." What followed was agony beyond anything that had come before. Cole had to reach inside her, trying to turn the baby while she screamed into a blanket to keep from biting through her own tongue. His hands were shaking, his face wet with sweat, or tears, or both. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." "Just do it," she gasped. It took 3 tries, each one more painful than the last. On the third attempt, something shifted. The baby moved, finding a new position, and suddenly the urge to push was overwhelming. "Now," Cole said, moving to catch the baby. "Push now." Nora pushed with everything she had left, which wasn't much. Her vision grayed at the edges, her body trying to shut down from exhaustion. But she kept pushing because the alternative was death, and she'd be damned if she died now after surviving everything else. The baby came in a rush, slippery, bloody, and terrifyingly silent. Cole caught their child, his hands sure despite his fear. He cleared the baby's mouth and nose like he'd practiced, rubbed the tiny chest, waited for the cry that would mean life. Nothing. "No," he said. "No, come on." He breathed into the baby's mouth, gentle puffs of air, rubbed the chest harder, did everything he'd been taught, and some things he made up on the spot. Still nothing. Nora tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. "Cole, I've got this." His voice was steel-wrapped in desperation. "I've got this." He breathed again, pressed on the tiny chest in a rhythm he'd seen a doctor use once, willed this child to live with the same stubborn determination that had kept him and Nora alive through everything. And then, like a miracle, or just dumb luck, the baby gasped, a weak rattling sound that grew stronger with the second breath. Then a cry, thin and reedy but unmistakably alive. Cole's whole body sagged with relief. "There you are. There you are." "Is it—" Nora could barely form words. "Boy or girl?" He looked, seemed surprised he hadn't checked already. "Girl, we have a daughter." A daughter. Nora had survived, the baby had survived, and they had a daughter. Cole wrapped the baby in clean cloth and brought her to Nora, placing the tiny bundle on her chest. The baby was red and wrinkled and covered in vernix, the most beautiful thing Nora had ever seen. "Hello," she whispered, her voice wrecked from screaming. "Hello, little one." The baby's eyes were closed, her fists curled tight against her chest. She was so small, so impossibly fragile. How were they supposed to keep something this delicate alive in a place that killed grown men? "We'll figure it out," Cole said, reading her thoughts. His hand covered both of theirs, baby and mother together. "We always do." The afterbirth came, and with it more bleeding than Cole was comfortable with. He packed cloth between Nora's legs, changed it when it soaked through, watched her face for signs she was fading. But Nora's body, stubborn as ever, held on. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Crisis after crisis, somehow survived. Dawn came, and with it the realization that they'd actually done it. Made it through the night, through the birth, through all the ways it could have gone wrong. The baby slept on Nora's chest, breathing steady and strong. Cole sat beside them, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one night. "You should rest," Nora said. "Can't. Need to watch you both." "Cole, please," his voice cracked. "Just let me watch you for a while. Make sure you're real." So she let him. Let him sit there with his hand on their daughter's back, counting each breath like it was precious. Which it was. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment they all stayed alive was precious. The next days blurred together. Nora's body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible, but she was alive. The baby, they hadn't named her yet, couldn't agree on anything, nursed well and slept in fits and starts. Cole barely left their side, jumping at every whimper, terrified something would go wrong. "She's fine," Nora told him on the third day. "Babies make noise, it's what they do." "I know, He rubbed his face. "I keep thinking about all the things that could happen. That's going to drive you crazy. Too late. But slowly, as the baby continued to thrive despite his fears, Cole started to relax. He learned to change her, to soothe her when she cried, to tell the difference between hungry cries and tired cries, and just plain mad cries. He was awkward at first, his big hands clumsy with something so small, but he learned. They all learned. How to survive on minimal sleep, how to work around a baby's needs, how to be a family instead of just two people sharing space. "What should we name her, Bossis?" Cole asked one evening, watching the baby sleep in the cradle he'd built. "I don't know. What do you like?" "Something strong. Something that means she won't break." Nora thought about it. About strength and survival and all the things that had brought them here. What about Ruth? It means friend, companion, and she was strong in the old stories. Cole tested the name. Ruth Maddox. I like it. Ruth it is then. Ruth grew faster than seemed possible. 1 month, 2 months, 3. She learned to smile, to laugh, to grab at things with increasing coordination. The cabin that had seemed so small with just 2 people now felt full in a good way, full of life and noise and purpose. Winter released its grip slowly, grudging each day of warmth. By the time spring came for real, Nora had recovered enough to start working again. She strapped Ruth to her chest in a sling and went about the daily tasks, the baby's weight becoming as familiar as her own. Cole watched them with an expression Nora had never seen before. Not just love, though there was that, but contentment. Like he'd found something he hadn't known he was looking for. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how wrong I was. About what I needed." She shifted Ruth's weight. "What do you mean?" "I thought I needed someone who wouldn't break, someone tough enough to survive up here." He crossed to her, touching Ruth's soft hair. "Turns out what I needed was someone who'd break and put themselves back together. Someone who'd fight for what matters, even when it's terrifying." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not. Tough means you don't crack. Strong means you crack and keep going anyway." He met her eyes. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Nora Maddox." Her throat tightened. "You're not so bad yourself." "I'm a mess, but I'm trying." That's all any of us can do. When Ruth was 6 months old, they made the trip to town to register her birth and stock up on supplies. The journey was harder with a baby, requiring more stops and more patience, but they managed. Town had changed, or maybe they had. People still gossiped, still judged, but Nora found she didn't care. Let them talk about the fat woman who'd married the cursed mountain man. Let them wonder how they'd survived when better people had died. None of it mattered. What mattered was the baby in her arms, healthy and curious and reaching for everything. What mattered was Cole negotiating prices with a confidence he hadn't had before. What mattered was the life they'd built from nothing. They ran into someone Nora hadn't expected, a traveling merchant who'd passed through the Blackridge trading post just last month. "Your mother and sister send their regards," he said, his tone suggesting the regards weren't particularly warm. "How are they?" Nora asked, because it seemed polite even if she didn't really care. "Managing. Your mother remarried, older gentleman with some property. Your sister's still unmarried, though your mother's working on that." Of course she was. Eleanor would never stop scheming, never stop trying to trade Clara's beauty for security. Nora felt a pang of pity for her sister, still trapped in that cycle of being displayed and judged and found wanting because no one ever saw past her face. "Well, give them my best if you see them again," Nora said. "Will do. Though between you and me, they didn't seem too interested in news about you." He glanced at Ruth. "Pretty baby, though. You've done well for yourself." After he left, Cole asked, "You all right?" "Yeah, I am." And she meant it. Whatever pain her family had caused, whatever wounds they'd left, time and distance had dulled them. She had a new family now, a better one. They stayed in town 3 days, and on the last night, Cole surprised her. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her to a building at the edge of town. It was a small house, nothing fancy but solid, well built, with glass windows and a real floor. "What is this?" Nora asked. "I bought it, or put a down payment on it anyway." He looked almost embarrassed. "Thought maybe we could winter here, just until Ruth's older, Safer than the cabin. Nora stared at the house, then at him. You want to leave the claim? Not permanently. Just for winters. We could still work it spring through fall, then come down when the snow gets bad. Give Ruth a better chance. It was practical, smart even. The cabin was no place for a baby during the brutal winter months, but it also felt like giving up, like admitting the mountains had beaten them. What about Jim and Tom? She asked. What about everything we survived to stay up there? They're dead, Nora, and we almost joined them half a dozen times. I'm not willing to risk Ruth for pride. It's not pride. Then what is it? His voice was sharp. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you'd rather prove something than keep our daughter safe. The accusation stung because it had some truth to it. Nora had fought so hard to survive the mountains, had nearly died proving she could handle it. The thought of retreating, even temporarily, felt like failure. But then Ruth made a sound in her arms, a little coo of contentment, and Nora remembered what actually mattered. You're right, she said quietly. I don't like it, but you're right. Cole's expression softened. We're not quitting. We're adapting. There's a difference. They started the new pattern that fall, working the claim through the warm months, then moving to town before the first serious snow. It wasn't easy, dividing their life between two places, but it worked. Ruth grew up knowing both the freedom of the mountains and the community of town. She learned to walk on pine needles and wooden floors. She knew the sound of wind through trees and the clatter of wagon wheels on streets. Years passed. Ruth grew into a sturdy, curious child who asked endless questions and feared nothing. Cole taught her to track animals and read weather signs. Nora taught her numbers and how to keep accounts. Together, they taught her that worth wasn't measured in beauty or delicacy, but in capability and character. The claim paid off better than they'd hoped. Not gold. The gold had always been a long shot, but other minerals, timber rights, land that became valuable as more people pushed west. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that had seemed impossible that first brutal winter. More children came. A son, Thomas, named for Cole's brother. Another daughter, Eleanor, named not for Nora's mother, but because they liked the name and wanted to remake it into something better. Each birth was terrifying. Each one survived. The house in town expanded. The cabin in the mountains gained more rooms. Their life grew to fill both spaces. One summer, when Ruth was 7 and full of questions, she asked Nora about the trading post. Why did you leave? Wasn't Grandma sad? Nora considered how to answer honestly, without bitterness. I left because I needed to find out who I was away from there. And yes, probably Grandma was sad. But sometimes people are sad because they're losing what they wanted you to be, not because they're losing who you actually are. I don't understand. You will someday, when people try to tell you what you should be instead of letting you figure it out yourself. Ruth thought about this. Papa says you're the bravest person he knows. Papa's biased. What does that mean? It means he loves me, so he doesn't see clearly. I think he sees fine. Ruth leaned against her. You did something scary, and it worked out. That's brave. From the mouths of children, Nora thought. Yeah, I suppose it is. That fall, they got word that Eleanor had died. A fever, quick and brutal. Clara had written, though the letter was brief and formal. No request for Nora to come back, no plea for help, just a notification that one chapter had finally closed. Nora felt less than she'd expected. Some sadness for the woman her mother might have been if life hadn't made her so desperate. Some pity for Clara, now alone and still unmarried, still trying to trade beauty for security in a world that didn't value it as much as she'd been taught. You want to go back? Pay respects? Cole asked. No, that life's done. Let it stay done. He nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. They'd both left things behind to build something new. Going back would only remind them of who they'd been instead of who they'd become. More years passed. The children grew, the business prospered, the rhythm of their life became comfortable. But comfortable didn't mean easy. There were still hard winters, still setbacks and struggles. Cole's body started to show the wear of hard living. His joints ached, his back gave him trouble. Nora's weight, which had stayed heavy through the years, started causing problems too. Her knees hurt, her breathing was harder than it should be. They were getting older, both of them. Survival was getting harder. One evening, sitting on the porch of their townhouse while the children played in the yard, Nora said, "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" Cole didn't need to ask what she meant. "Sometimes I regret specific choices. Wish I'd checked on Jim and Tom sooner. Wish I'd been gentler when I was teaching you to survive that first winter. But the big choice? Asking you to come with me?" He shook his head. "Never. Even when it's been hard? Especially then. Easy doesn't teach you anything. Hard shows you what you're made of." He took her hand. "I know what I'm made of now. And I know what you're made of. That's worth all the hard years." Ruth came running up, 11 years old and full of energy. "Mama, Thomas won't let me practice tracking with him." "That's because you scared off all the deer last time," Thomas yelled from the yard. "Did not." "Did too," Nora sighed. "Work it out yourselves. I'm not getting in the middle of it." Ruth stomped back to her brother, and they could hear the argument continuing. Cole chuckled. "They fight like we did that first winter. We fought because we were terrified and didn't know each other. What's their excuse?" "They're siblings. That's excuse enough." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children argue and play and be young in a way neither of them had ever really gotten to be. This was what they'd survived for, not the claim or the money or the security, though those mattered. But this, watching life continue, watching the next generation grow strong. "You know what I think?" Nora said. "What?" "I think we did all right. Not perfect, but all right. High praise from you. I'm practical, not generous with compliments." He laughed, the sound easy and warm. "That you are." Years later, when the children were grown and starting their own lives, Nora and Cole made a final trip to the mountain cabin. They were older now, both of them moving slower, feeling their age in every joint and muscle. But they wanted to see it one more time. The cabin was still standing, weathered but solid. They'd built well all those years ago, built something that lasted. Inside, everything was dusty but intact. The bed where Ruth had been born, the table where they'd eaten countless meals, the fireplace where they'd huddled through storms and told stories and learned to be a family. "Strange, isn't it?" Nora said. "How much life happened in such a small space." "Not strange, just real." Cole ran his hand over the table. "This is where it all started, where we figured out how to survive, and where we figured out how to live. There's a difference." They stayed one night, sleeping in the cabin like they had decades before, but this time there was no fear, no desperate fight for survival. Just two people who'd made it through everything and come out the other side still together. In the morning, before they left, Nora stood in the doorway looking out at the mountains. They were beautiful, she could admit now. Still dangerous, still unforgiving, but beautiful. "I'm glad I came here," she said. "Glad you asked me." Cole stood beside her. "I'm glad you said yes. Even though I was terrified? Especially because you were terrified. Courage isn't not being scared, it's being scared and doing it anyway." They locked the cabin and rode back to town, back to the life they'd built. The claim would pass to Ruth and Thomas someday, along with the stories of how it had been won, how two desperate people had bet everything on each other and somehow won. Nora lived to see her grandchildren born, to see Ruth become a woman of substance and strength, to see Thomas build a business that would support his family for generations. She lived to see Clara one more time, her sister aged and alone, still beautiful but diminished by years of being valued only for her appearance. They met by chance in town, both old women now, though Clara had aged harder. Her beauty faded, leaving nothing substantial beneath. "You got lucky," Clara said, her voice bitter. "That's all." "Maybe," Nora agreed. "Or maybe I made my own luck by choosing something real over something easy. He only wanted you because you could work. He wanted me because I was honest, and I wanted him for the same reason. Everything else we built from there." Nora looked at her sister, feeling more pity than anger. "You were waiting to be chosen for the right reasons, Clara. I chose myself first. That made all the difference." They parted without warmth, but without hatred either. Just two people who'd lived different lives and gotten different results. Cole died first, his heart giving out one winter morning while he was splitting wood. Quick and relatively painless, which seemed fitting for a man who'd valued efficiency. Nora grieved hard, but didn't break. She'd learned too much about surviving to let grief destroy her. She lived 3 more years, long enough to see all her children settled and happy, long enough to tell her grandchildren stories about the frontier and survival and what it meant to choose your own path. On her last night, Ruth sat beside her bed holding her hand. "Tell me again," Ruth said, "about when Papa chose you." Nora smiled, the memory still vivid after all the years. Everyone expected him to choose beauty. He chose capability instead, chose someone who wouldn't quit when things got hard. But he didn't just choose capability. He chose you. Eventually. Took him a while to figure out he was choosing more than a work partner. Nora squeezed her daughter's hand. But that's how the best things happen. You start with honesty and build from there. All the prettiness in the world can't compete with truth. Is that the lesson? Choose truth over beauty? The lesson is choose yourself first. Choose who you actually are over who people want you to be. Everything else follows from that. Nora's breathing was getting harder, each breath an effort. I could have stayed at that trading post. Could have kept being invisible, kept doing the work while your aunt got the credit. But I chose to leave. Chose a harder path because it was mine. You weren't scared? Terrified. Still did it anyway. She managed one more smile. Being scared just means something matters. Don't ever let fear stop you from trying. Those were the last words Ruth remembered her mother saying. By morning, Nora was gone, slipped away peacefully in her sleep. They buried her next to Cole on the mountain claim, the place where they'd built their life together. The whole family came, children, grandchildren, even people from town who'd known them over the years. Ruth spoke at the service, telling the story of how her parents had met, how her mother had been overlooked and underestimated, how she'd chosen